right, welcome back. Today we're going to cover activity 4. This is going to be the last video in this series, and we'll be talking about the ecdysozoans. So prior to watching this video, you should have read the handout, taken a look at some of the supplementary materials, and after this video, you should be able to answer questions 16 through 18 on your worksheet. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So the subdivision Ecdyzoa includes two phyla, Nematoda and Arthropoda. And the critical innovation here is ecdysis, or being able to shed that outer layer of the cuticle, so what we think of as molting. So here we have highlighted on this phylogenetic tree those critical innovations. So if we go from the bottom up, they're multicellular. They contain tissues, they have bilateral symmetry, protosome development, and ecdysis. So this is a highly diverse group. So in the phylum Nematoda, that's commonly referred to as roundworms. Don't get this confirmed with earthworms or annelids. This is a different phylum, an ecdysozoan. And so they're still within the same clade, Bilateria, but they're in a different subdivision. So Nematoda roundworms. And it includes hookworms, whipworms, and pinworms. And they lack a skeleton. So the pseudocoel provides hydrostatic pressure, which gives the body support and framework. So essentially, it depends on water pressure. They have a complete digestive system, so a mouth and an anus, and they have a thick cuticle made of collagen, and that's secreted by the epidermis. So they have a wide variety of ecological habitats, and many of these species within this subdivision are parasitic and within this phylum. So here we're briefly looking at the anatomy of a nematoda. So something to note is that the males are a lot smaller in size, and they have separate male and female organisms. So here we're looking at the mouth. We'll take a look at the male first and then go to the female. We have our pharynx, nerve ring, intestine, and then the rest of the male is pretty much made up of testes, so sexual reproductive organs. And then the female, we have the same kind of generalized digestive and nervous system parts, and then the rest of the body is going to be made up of the ovary, uterus, and vulva. And then here it has a lot of everything highlighted. I would say is pretty important, and you should probably take a closer look at and just practice labeling these different parts of the nematoda. So that was a brief introduction. So just as a reminder, the digestive system is going to evolve from that endoderm tissue, and the muscular tissue is going to derive from that mesoderm. So again, these are going to be triploblasts. So we're still having those three major tissues that were in development. So the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm. Next, we're looking at phylum Arthropoda. So that's within the clade Bilateria, and that subdivision Ecdysozoa. And something significant about them is they have those segmented bodies. So they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And that's all supported by the exoskeleton. And they're one of the most diverse groups on the planet, around 6 to 10 million species. And it includes different classes like Insecta, Arachnia, Myriapoda, and Crustacea. So tons, just in those single groups, single classes, there's tons of diversity within a single one. So yeah, tons of diversity. They have a complete digestive system, so a mouth and an anus, and an open circulatory system. And that's based on a blood homologue that's similar to blood, but it's called hemolymph. So you can kind of think of that as arthropoda blood. And their respiratory system lacks lungs. So they actually use these tubes that traverse and internally circulate oxygen called tracheae, and then they also have smaller tubes called tracheoles. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But the circulatory system, respiratory system, and the exoskeleton all limit the size. So it's theorized that insects and arthropods in general were much larger way back when because of the excess or the increased amounts of oxygen. So oxygen is a limiting factor for size. Here we're just looking at, again, just how diverse arthropoda is. So in red, we see everything that's arthropoda, those phylum and those subphylum. And then here are the rest of the, the rest of the groups. And so you can just see like how diverse that is in the general makeup. So these are the non-protostomes. So these are ones we'll be talking about. These are ones we'll be talking about in next week if they're deuterostomes. And then here are the different groups we've covered so far. So there's tons of different types of arthropods. Like I mentioned, so we have class Insecta. Those are true bugs, beetles, butterflies, mosquitoes. And then we have class Arachnia. So that includes scorpions, spiders, ticks, mites. Then we have Myriapoda. So that's going to be our millipedes and our centipedes. And then we have crustacea. So we have crabs, shrimp, crayfish, lobster. I mean, those are just general, and that should be enough to kind of give you an idea of those different phylums, subphylums, and classes underneath arthropoda, underneath the phylum Arthropoda. So here we're going to be looking kind of at a grasshopper dissection, and there will be a resource available for you to look at this virtually, an actual grasshopper dissection. They have a really cool makeup, but for the most part, we will just be going over identifying and labeling distinct parts and morphological features of the grasshopper. So we'll be looking at the lubber grasshopper as our model organism. So that's what is pictured here. So members of class Insecta have three main body regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And so here they are laid out for you. So here we have the head, the thorax, and then the abdomen. And you'll learn a lot more about insects if you take entomology. It was a really fun class, and I definitely encourage you to take it if you're interested at all in this type of stuff. So these three segments have each have their own set of legs, and then there's two posterior thoracic segments that each have a pair of wings. So here you're seeing that the wings start up at the thoracic part, or the thoracic segment, and then we have a set of legs on each segment. So these are called our jointed limbs. So arthro, jointed, pods, foot. So jointed limbs, and then we have our wings as well. So that's a general makeup of a grasshopper and key parts. So this entire exoskeleton, it's made up of chitin, and so that's a long chain polymer of N-acetylglucosamine. So that's a derivative of glucose, and so chitin is really durable, and it's super strong, but it's also flexible. So it gives the ability to kind of protect the internal makeup of this grasshopper, but also the flexibility to be able to bend and move these different limbs. So here we're looking at the external anatomy of the grasshopper. So they do have sensory structures. So they're able to use their antennae to sense external stimuli. They have eyes called ocelli, and they're able to sense light. And then, so we have a simple eye, a compound eye, antenna, and then we have these mouth parts. So this is called a clypeus, and then we have our mandible, and then our labium, maxillary palp, and labial palp. So these are all what make up the head portion of a grasshopper. So here we're looking at the mouth and feeding appendages. The mouth parts, the mouth contains a pair of mandibles and 2 pairs of maxillae. So here we're looking at the labrum, so that's the upper part. We have our mandible, which is our, what you think of as that chomping. And then we have our maxilla, and they have a palp and labrum. So this is kind of a simplified version of what we just looked at. So now to talk a little bit about the grasshopper respiratory system. So oxygen is able to enter via diffusion in the spiracle. So spiracles are these holes in the thorax and the abdomen that allow air to come in and out. So there's one pair of spiracles per body segment. And so these small valves keep the spiracle closed until there's need for oxygen. And then they open the spiracles up, and then the oxygen is able to travel through tubes called trachea, which then divide into smaller tubes called tracheoles. So these continue to divide, branching out, and until they reach all the cells in the body. So carbon dioxide released from the cells flow out the same pathway back to the spiracles where they started and go out of the body via diffusion. So, and you may or may not be able to observe the spiracles down the entire length of the abdomen, but they are present in all 3 sections. So now to talk a little bit about the open circulatory system. So this is where the hemolymph is within a cavity called the hemocyl, and it immerses the organs directly. So there's no real distinction between blood and fluids. It's all just kind of hemolymph. So a single blood vessel runs from the head to the abdomen and divides into chambers, which function as the insect's heart. So they have like a tubular heart. And then the hemolymph enters and exits the body cavity through perforations in the heart called ostia. And the muscle contractions is what actually pushes the hemolymph from one chamber to the next. And its hemolymph is made up of 10% hemocytes, which are blood cells, and most of it is watery plasma. So it doesn't carry, hemolymph does not carry oxygen, and it doesn't contain red blood cells, but again, it's a blood analog or homolog. So just some specifications and clarifications to make there. And the hemolymph is usually a yellow or green color. So if you've been mean and ever smashed a grasshopper or a spider, you often see like this yellow gooey liquid, and that's going to be the hemolymph. So here we're just looking at the diagram of the hemolymph going into the heart and then going out of these chambers. So here we're looking at the dissection of the internal anatomy. So we're looking at the digestive system. So we should start at the mouth. So they have the mouth parts, which we took a look at. I think it's important that you kind of really take some time and look at these labels and kind of make your own diagrams. So we'll go from the mouth and into the esophagus. through the crop, through the gastrocachia, and then entering the stomach. And from the stomach, you enter the intestine, the rectum, and then the anus. So this is a complete digestive system because we have one end and the other. Yeah, so this is the gastric, excuse me. The crop is found at the anterior portion of the digestive tract and is the organ that is responsible for storing food. And this gastrocachia, which is new to us, are digestive glands, which are attached to the stomach. So they just aid in that process of digestion. And with that, we're pretty much finished up. Here's this table that may be helpful for you to organize everything that we've gone over. It's confusing, I know. The file, keeping all the scientific names straight and then the common names. And this, if you decide to fill this out, I think it will be really helpful with your studying for the next lab practical, and also just to organize the information in a digestible way. So with that, that was the end of activity 4. So you can go ahead and answer questions 16 through 18 on your worksheet. Have a great day and reach out to your lab instructor if you are having any issues or trouble filling out the worksheet. We are more than happy to help you and aid in the learning process.